The galactic empire of Fear the galaxy was vast, filled with countless planets and civilizations. But there was one truth that all beings shared. Their lives were controlled by the Iron Claw Empire, a ruthless and cold alien race, the Archthans, ruled with an iron fist. They were powerful, feared, and merciless. The Empire had conquered planet after planet, forcing every species under their control to live in constant terror. The Archthons didn't rule with diplomacy or peace. They ruled with fear. Fear was their weapon, and it was stronger than any army or technology they possessed. On the distant planet of Avera, humanity lived in the shadow of the Archthon Empire. The once thriving civilization was now a broken shell of its former self. The people of Avera had been enslaved, forced to work in the mines and factories, producing weapons and supplies for the Archthans. Every day, the humans were reminded of their place beneath the Archthan overlords. The Empire's ships, like silent giants, patrolled the skies, and the soldiers on the ground kept everyone in check. Any sign of rebellion was quickly crushed. Among the humans on Avera was a young man named Ethan. He had grown up under the Empire's rule, never knowing freedom. His father had been a miner, and his mother had worked as a laborer in the Archthans factories. Ethan had seen them both suffer, and now he worked alongside them in the same brutal conditions. Each day, he saw the Archthans pass by with their cold, glowing eyes and their advanced weaponry. They seemed invincible, like gods who could wipe out any resistance without a second thought. But as Ethan walked through the labor camp, something inside him began to stir. He was tired of the endless work, tired of the constant fear, and most of all, tired of being powerless. He had heard whispers among the workers' rumors of a rebellion, a group of humans who were tired of living under the Archthon's control and were willing to do whatever it took to fight back. Ethan didn't believe it at first. How could anyone stand up to the Archthons? They had the weapons, the ships, the power. No one could defeat them. Still, those whispers lingered in his mind. He couldn't ignore them. As he worked in the mines, he started to notice things. Small things at first, flickers of movement in the shadows, strange symbols carved into the walls, and the occasional glance from a fellow worker that spoke volumes. Something was happening. The rumors were truth. There was a resistance forming. One day, as Ethan was on his break, he overheard a conversation between two workers. They were talking in hushed voices, their faces hidden behind helmets. "The plan is coming together," one of them said. "We've found the weapon. If we can get it to the surface, we can use it to strike back." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. A weapon? Could it really be true? Was there something powerful enough to fight the Archthans? He had to know more. He moved closer, careful not to make a sound, and listened as the two workers continued their conversation. "The Archthons have kept it hidden beneath the surface for centuries," the second worker said, "but we've found the way in. If we can get to it, we can change everything." Ethan's mind raced. A weapon that could change everything. Could this be humanity's chance to fight back, to finally stand up to the Archthons? That night, as Ethan lay in his small, dimly lit room in the barracks, he couldn't sleep. The thoughts of rebellion and resistance filled his mind. Could he really be a part of this? Could he join the fight? He had no experience with weapons, no military training, but he had something that many of the Archthons did not, the will to fight for something greater than himself. He stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. The Archthan ships glided silently through the sky, like predators stalking their prey. The fear they spread was like a thick fog, clouding everything. But tonight, something inside him burned brighter than ever before. He couldn't just stand by and let the Arcthans continue their reign. He had to do something. Ethan knew that whatever happened next, it wouldn't be easy. The Arcthans had the galaxy in their grip, and breaking free would mean facing overwhelming odds. But for the first time in his life, he felt something he hadn't felt before: hope. A spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, humanity wasn't as powerless as the Archfans thought. The next morning, Ethan made his decision. He would find the resistance. He would join them, and together they would find a way to fight back. As he prepared to leave his quarters, he heard a knock at the door. His heart raced, but when he opened it, there was no one there, just a small metal device left on the floor. Confused, he picked it up and examined it. It was a communicator, a device used by the Resistance. Ethan's heart pounded as he realized the next step had already been taken. The rebellion had found him. This was it. The beginning of something. Big Ethan was no longer just a worker in the mines. He was part of something larger, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. But he knew the path ahead would be dangerous. The Archthons would stop at nothing to protect their empire. The rebellion would need to move fast. And Ethan, just an ordinary man, would have to become something more if he wanted to survive the coming storm. As the communicator buzzed, a voice crackled through the static, whispering a single word: prepare. The Resistance was ready, and humanity's fight for freedom had just begun. The rising spark of humanity's hands trembled as he held the small communicator in his palm. He could barely believe it. He was holding a direct line to the Resistance. The Arcthans, with all their might and power, had never once expected humans to rise up. Fear was their greatest weapon, and until now it had worked flawlessly. But for the first time, the galaxy felt different. For the first time, the people of Avira weren't just accepting their fate, they were preparing to fight back. The voice from the communicator crackled once more, breaking Ethan's thoughts. We need you, Ethan. The time is now. He clenched the device and nodded, even though no one could see him. The rebellion had finally found him, and now the weight of it all hit him fully. He was about to become part of something greater than he ever imagined. But how could someone like him, an ordinary miner, make a real difference in a war against the Ark? That same day, a mysterious figure appeared at Ethan's door, cloaked in shadows. It was a woman, tall and strong, with sharp eyes that seemed to look right through him. Her face was half hidden beneath a dark hood, but there was no mistaking the symbol she wore on her chest, the mark of the Resistance. You, Ethan? She asked in a low, controlled voice. Yeah, he replied, his heart pounding. Who are you? Call me Zara, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've come to bring you to the others. We don't have much time. The Archthans are starting to catch wind of our movements, and they won't rest until they stamp us out. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard stories of how the Archthons punished even the slightest act of rebellion. It wasn't just about military power for them, it was about making an example of anyone who dared to oppose them. The fear they spread was a message: you are nothing, your lives are ours to take. But now, standing face to face with someone who dared to resist, Ethan felt something stir inside him that he had never felt before, a kind of fire that couldn't be extinguished. Zara led him through dark alleyways and hidden tunnels. Careful. to avoid the watchful eyes of Arcthan soldiers patrolling the streets. Ethan's heart raced with every turn, and every creak of the floorboards seemed to echo like a gunshot in his ears. The Empire's grip on Avera was tight. The streets, once vibrant and full of life, now seemed like tombs. There was no freedom, here only fear. But as they ventured deeper into the underbelly of the city, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected, a spark of hope. The resistance wasn't just a small group of disorganized rebels. It was a network, a hidden army preparing to strike at the heart of the Arcthan Empire. When they finally reached the heart of the rebellion's secret base, Ethan was introduced to the rest of the group fighters, technicians, strategists, and ordinary civilians who had all decided they were done. Living in fear, there was no turning back now. They had made their choice, and the choice was clear. They would fight. Zara walked up to a map that was pinned on the wall, showing detailed layouts of the Arcthon military installations and supply lines across Avera. The map was dotted with red markers, each one signifying a target for the coming assault. "We've been gathering intel for years," Zara explained. "Every act of sabotage, every small victory, has been part of a much larger plan. The Arcthons have no idea what's coming." Ethan stood in awe, looking around at the people who had come together for a cause greater than themselves. It was as if they were all connected by the same thread, the desire to reclaim their freedom, to rid the galaxy of the fear that had kept them in chains for so long. And yet, the road ahead was far from simple. Zara turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Ethan, it's time. The Arcthans have a weapon hidden beneath the surface of Avera, something far beyond anything we've seen. We believe it's the key to their power. If we can take it from them, we'll have a chance to finally break their hold on the galaxy. Are you ready for this?" Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the chance he'd been waiting for. The chance to not just fight, but to change the future. He nodded firmly. "I'm ready." The first mission was set in motion. Infiltrate one of the Arcthan's key military bases and steal the plans for the weapon. It wouldn't be easy. The Empire had eyes everywhere. They were as much a part of the galaxy as the stars themselves. But for the first time in Ethan's life, he wasn't alone. He was part of something bigger, a force united by one purpose: to break free from the fear that had controlled them for so long. That night, the resistance moved in silence. The base was heavily guarded, but Zara and the others had a plan. They moved like shadows through the darkness, using every skill at their disposal to avoid detection. Ethan, who had never used a weapon before, was handed a small, sleek blaster. His hands shook as he held it, but Zara gave him a reassuring glance. "You don't need to be a soldier to make a difference," she said quietly. "You just need to believe." Ethan nodded, a feeling of determination flooding his chest. They reached the control room without incident, but the real challenge was still ahead. The plans for the weapon were locked in a Vault 1 that only the highest-ranking Arcthon officers had access to. This was no ordinary heist. Just as Zara was about to crack the Vault's code, the alarms suddenly blared. The Arcthons had detected their presence. It was a trap, but the resistance was ready. "Move out," Zara shouted. Chaos erupted. Blasters fired, and explosions lit up the night. The Arcthans were coming in full force, but the humans fought with everything they had. It wasn't just a fight for it was a fight for freedom. Ethan ran, his heart racing as gunfire echoed in his ears. He could feel the pulse of humanity's fight surge through his veins. No longer just a worker or a prisoner, he was part of something far more powerful. Humanity was no longer just hiding in the shadows. They were fighting back. And the Archthons were beginning to realize that they weren't invincible after all. Asterisk. The battle for the galaxy. The chaos of the battle was deafening. Ethan's heart pounded as blaster fire lit up the sky, cutting through the darkness like streaks of lightning. The sound of explosions echoed off the walls of the Archthon military base as the resistance fighters rushed through the corridors, dodging enemy fire and taking cover behind crates and equipment. The Archthons were powerful, their soldiers expertly trained, but the humans were fueled by something far stronger: hope, the desire for freedom, and a deep, unshakable will to survive. Ethan's hands shook as he held the blaster Zara had given him, but he forced himself to focus. He wasn't the same terrified miner anymore. He was part of a movement that could change everything. Humanity had been crushed under the weight of fear for far too long, but now the scales were beginning to tip, and Ethan wasn't about to let it slip away. The mission was clear. They had to reach the heart of the base, where the plans for the Archthon weapon were kept. But the way was anything but clear. Every turn, every hallway seemed to be filled with danger. The Archthons were closing in, their soldiers relentless, and their weaponry far superior to anything the humans had. But it didn't matter. The humans had something the Archthons had never counted: a relentless, burning desire to win. "Keep moving," Zara shouted as she led the way, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We need to reach the central core." Ethan followed close behind, his eyes scanning the surroundings, adrenaline pumping through his veins. For every Archthon they took down, two more seemed to appear in their place. The Empire's forces were everywhere, and they had been prepared for this moment. But the Resistance had a trick up their sleeves: the ancient weapon they had uncovered, hidden beneath the surface of Avira. The weapon was said to be more powerful than anything the Archthons had. It was a relic from an ancient race, a civilization long forgotten that had once stood against the Empire. Its energy was unlike anything in the galaxy, capable of turning the tide of any battle. The Resistance believed it was their only hope of defeating the Archthons once and for all. As they neared the central core of the base, the fighting grew fiercer. Archthon soldiers were everywhere, and Ethan could feel their gaze on him. His instincts screamed to run, to find cover, but he pushed the fear down. He wasn't running anymore. He was standing his ground. The central core was a massive chamber, filled with swirling energy and buzzing machinery. The air felt thick with the weight of the weapon's power. Zara and the rest of the team began to set charges, planting explosives on key points in the room, while Ethan scanned the area. His mind raced. If they didn't disable the weapon's defenses, their mission would fail. The stakes had never been higher. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut with a resounding crash, locking them inside the chamber. Ethan's pulse quickened as he realized what was happening. The Archthons had anticipated their move. Trap. Zara hissed, "We've been set up." The walls of the chamber began to glow with an ominous red light, and a low hum filled the air. The weapon was powering up, and its defense systems were engaging. This wasn't just a fight for the weapon anymore. This was a fight for their lives. Without warning, the ground beneath them shook as energy blasts fired from the walls. Ethan dove for cover, his heart in his throat. The Archthons had activated their ultimate defense, an energy field that could wipe them all out in an instant. "We need to disable the energy field," Zara shouted. "Ethan, You take the control panel on the far side. The rest of you, cover him. Ethan didn't hesitate. He sprinted across the chamber, dodging blasts of energy as they narrowly missed him. He reached the control panel, his fingers trembling as he tried to override the system. The countdown on the screen flashed, ominously, warning that the energy field would be fully operational in mere minutes. His mind raced as he worked to disable the system. The Arcthan soldiers were closing in, and the resistance was spread thin, trying to hold them off. This was the moment. Everything depended on whether or not he could succeed. With a final, desperate push, Ethan cracked the code and shut down the system. The energy field flickered and then collapsed, the lights returning to their normal hue. He breathed a sigh of relief, but there was no time to rest. The Arcthans were regrouping, and their forces were only growing stronger. "Zara," Ethan shouted. "The weapon's ready. We need to destroy it now." Zara nodded, her face grim. "We don't have much time. This is our last chance." The Resistance set the final charges and prepared to leave. The weapon was on the verge of activation, but they couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. With the Arcthon forces closing in on them, they needed to move quickly. But just as they were about to make their escape, a shadow loomed over them. The Arcthon general, a towering figure clad in black armor, stepped forward, flanked by his elite guard. He had come for them. "You cannot defeat us," the general said, his voice cold and final. "The galaxy is ours. Your rebellion is nothing more than a fleeting moment in time." Ethan stood tall, despite the fear that still gnawed at him. The general was right. The Arcthans were powerful, but humanity had something they could never understand: unbreakable spirit. They had fought for too long, endured too much. To just give up now. "This is where it ends," Ethan said, his voice steady. The battle began again, more intense than ever. The Resistance fought with everything they had, pushing back the Archithans with the full force of their desperation. The room was filled with the roar of battle, and every second felt like an eternity. But humanity wasn't going down without a fight. They had stood up to the fear, and now they would stand up to the Empire. The final push had begun. Humanity's triumph. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and burning metal. The last of the Resistance fighters were huddled behind the wreckage of the control room. The remnants of their battle with the Arcthon forces scattered all around them. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. But there was a fire in their eyes that the Arcthans could never extinguish. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. The Arcthan general was gone, defeated by a final, desperate push from the Resistance. But there was no time to celebrate. The weapon, the one thing that could change the tide of the entire galaxy, was still primed and ready for activation. They had only seconds left before the Arcthans could unleash it. Ethan knew the stakes if they didn't act now. The Arcthons would regain control of the galaxy, and all of their sacrifices would have been in vain. Zara crouched beside him, her voice low but urgent. "We've got one shot at this. We disable the weapon now, or we all die." Ethan nodded, the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. They had come this far, he couldn't fail now. The massive weapon was nestled in the heart of the control room, surrounded by layers of security and defensive shields. The Arcthons had built it as their ultimate weapon, capable of annihilating entire planets with a single strike. But now it was theirs to destroy. Zara turned to the team of engineers who had been working tirelessly throughout the battle, hoping to find a way to breach the weapon's defense systems. "Is it ready?" she asked. One of the engineers, A wiry man named Cade wiped his brow and shook his head. Almost. The security systems are unlike anything we've ever seen. But there's a back door. We can access it through the core. But we'll need a distraction to buy us enough time. Ethan looked around the room, his mind racing. The Archthons were still regrouping, their forces flooding the base. The distraction would have to be something big, something that would draw their attention long enough to allow the engineers to finish their work. The only problem was that distraction could very well cost them everything. "I'll do it," Ethan said, stepping forward. Zara looked at him, eyes narrowing. "What are you thinking?" "I'll set the explosives," Ethan said, voice steady. "I'll draw the Arxan's attention while you finish the work. You won't have much time, but it'll be enough. I'll make sure they're focused on me." Zara hesitated, but then nodded, her expression resolute. "Make it count," Ethan. Fingers were numb as he strapped the explosives to his chest. The plan was simple. He would head to the base's entrance, where the Archthon reinforcements would arrive, and create an explosion large enough to draw them in. With the distraction in place, the engineers would breach the weapon's security and shut it down for good. The timing would be tight, but if they could pull it off, the weapon would be disabled, and the Archthons would be left with nothing. "Good luck," Zara said, her voice softer now, the weight of the moment clear. Ethan smiled grimly. "I'm not the lucky one, you are." He sprinted down the corridor, his heart pounding. The countdown in his head echoed, ticking away the precious seconds. The halls were eerily quiet, now save for the distant thrum of Archthon forces preparing for their final assault. Ethan could feel them closing in, but he didn't slow down. The resistance had fought too hard to give up now. He reached the entrance to the base, where a massive door stood between him and the Archthons. The door was reinforced, heavily guarded, but Ethan wasn't interested in subtlety. He triggered the explosives, and the door blasted open with a deafening roar, sending a shockwave through the base. The sound was deafening, just the kind of noise that would send the Archthons scrambling. Sure enough, within moments, the first wave of Archthon soldiers appeared, their red-armored figures charging down the hall toward him. Ethan didn't flinch. He held his ground, raising his weapon and firing a few warning shots. The Archthons were relentless, and he knew they'd keep coming, no matter how many he took down. The seconds dragged on, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Ethan could hear Zara's voice crackling through his communicator. We've almost got it. Just a little longer." He fired again, his breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The soldiers were getting closer now, and the Archthons knew exactly where he was. But Ethan had something they didn't: a willingness to fight for a future, where fear no longer ruled. He dove behind a nearby column as an explosion rang out, sending debris flying in all directions. The shockwave threw him to the ground, but he quickly scrambled back to his feet. The Archthons were getting closer. He could feel their eyes on him, could hear their voices echoing through the corridor. But there was no turning back now. His sacrifice would mean everything. Zara's voice cut through the static again. "It's done. The weapon's disabled." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. They had done it. The Archthons, realizing their weapon had been neutralized, were thrown into disarray. Without their ultimate weapon, their reign of terror began to crumble. The resistance surged forward, pushing through the Archthon defenses with renewed strength. The fear that had held the galaxy captive for so long was slipping away, and in its place, something new was taking root: hope. As the last of the Archthons fell, the resistance stood victorious, The weapon was destroyed, their future secured. But it wasn't just a battle. It was the beginning of a new era. The era of humanity. Ethan stood in the midst of the destruction, his heart still racing, but now filled with something far more powerful than freedom. The battle was over, but the war had just begun. And for the first time in a long time, humanity wasn't just surviving, they were thriving. As the stars above Avera shone brightly in the distance, Ethan looked toward the horizon. The galaxy was theirs to reclaim, and the story of humanity's triumph over the Archathons would echo through the stars forever.